Back in 2017, only a year or so into the Trumpian hellscape that has now consumed all of our lives, I went to see an early critic screening of Justice League. Now, mind you, this was the theatrically released Justice League version, cobbled together in extensive reshoots by Buffy the Vampire Slayer creator and all-around epic douchebag Joss Whedon, after Zack Snyder was forced to leave the project due to a family tragedy. Watching this weird Frankenstein compromise version, trying my best not to be distracted by the disjointed presentation of two radically different directorial visions, something struck me as particularly odd about the third act. Specifically how so much of the action centering around Superman's return from his death in the previous film was clearly reshot, with a distinctly CGI mustacheless Man of Steel devoting a great deal of his time saving some random family stranded in the battle zone. At the time, I couldn't fully articulate why I intuitively found this extended sequence so strange, only wondering why a movie already so stuffed with characters, lore, and plot was wasting so much time on something so rote and cliché as superheroes saving people. Then a few years later I watched Zack Snyder's ridiculous Vanity Project cut, and I realized why the family subplot felt so out of place. As a comic book fan, even though I had seen and mostly disliked all of the preceding Snyderverse films for all of their sound and fury signifying nothing, I was still taking it for granted that we actually needed to see superheroes act like superheroes. Good, decent people who sacrificed their lives and livelihoods in the selfless act of helping others. As I sat through 4 long, slogging hours of slow, ramping misery retelling essentially the same story in Joss's version, just unnecessarily longer and more cruel, with all the good scenes where heroes act heroically, and yes, a few cringy brunch jokes taken out, I was left battered and numbed by a world of some of my favorite fictional characters that I did not recognize, and seemed to only exist to mock my childlike naivete in thinking people with great power might use said power responsibly by, not being jerks. The original Joss Whedon version had a whole monologue from Batman about how good it was to save people, and ended with the heroes literally beating the bad guys with the power of their heroic ideology, turning the villain's fear against him. And in the new one, well, yeah, they just straight up chop his f***ing head off and kick it through a portal to another planet to show his boss how badass and cool they are. Arguably more viscerally satisfying, I grant you, but I came to these movies for heroism, not whatever this is. When my friend approached me about joining his YouTube channel and doing long-form content, he said I could do whatever I wanted, but then gave me one actual assignment: a comparative analysis of the then upcoming James Gunn reboot of Superman juxtaposed against Snyder's conception of the character under the framework of what did Gunn get right that Snyder got wrong. Since the new movie wasn't even out yet, he was taking it on faith that given my well-documented admiration for Gunn's prior work in the genre, and my strident distaste for Snyder's version, that I would inevitably have enough material for a video. And yes, dispositionally it was a good bet that I would find a lot of improvements, but now having seen the movie, I don't know how much I have to talk about. It's not that the premise is wrong. I'm not about to throw out a hot take that Snyder was actually better, but the answer to the question is so incredibly, almost self-evidently obvious that you only have to see Gunn's film once to understand what makes it better immediately. It's literally as clear as the big red S on Soup's chest, which, somewhat ironically, it is the Snyder version that stops to point out is not in fact an S, but rather the Kryptonian symbol for
hope. In my world, it means hope.
Before, forgetting that the concept of hope ever existed. That's the difference, or at least the most substantive one. Gunn understands and appreciates the need for hope, and Snyder rejects it. If you don't know, Zack Snyder is, or at least was at the time, a self-described Randian objectivist. If you don't know what that is, Randian objectivism is a right-wing ideology concocted by famous philosopher, sci-fi writer, and asshole Ayn Rand that preaches the virtue of selfishness. Her title, not mine. Essentially, it's a rejection of altruism and a deliberate subversion of traditional morality, best exemplified in her seminal work Atlas Shrugged, about the billionaire class going on strike and retiring to a private island to show all us unwashed masses how much we'd miss them when they're gone. It's about as well written as it sounds, which is to say basically unreadable, and don't watch the trilogy of movies they made a while back either. They also suck. I don't know if Snyder still holds to Randian philosophy at all, or how fervently he ever did, but he has said on multiple occasions that his dream project is an adaptation of Rand's The Fountainhead, an even dumber story about an architect who would rather destroy his own building than let anyone tell him how to build it. I certainly hope my editor is backing this up with a clip of Snyder's Superman and Zod carelessly tearing through the Metropolis skyline to illustrate my point before I have to. Do I have to explain why Snyder is not the best person you should give your keys to a superhero universe? Superheroes are defined by their altruism, their dedication to helping others even at their own expense. Someone who sees altruism as a bad thing is what we call a bad person. I had a college professor who once gave what I believe he characterized as the Catholic definition of love: willing the good for another. As cheesy as it sounds, that is what superheroes are, at least to me. Avatars of love. Not necessarily romantic, but the larger platonic love that we should all have for each other, but often forget to practice. They exist to inspire us to be our best selves, to love each other better, and that ethos is baked into the DNA of every frame of Gunn's new movie. Gunn's Superman is, I believe, a very deliberate and pointed critical antidote to Snyder's Superman, taking its grim dark world apart piece by piece in a manner that seems effortless and almost accidental. One perfect line encompasses his main argument, called back later as a literal musical theme with the ending song, that maybe caring is the new punk rock. Maybe kindness is cool. And all the people trying to tell you otherwise, all the cynics and postmodern fact-free bullshit artists are wrong, and their concerted conspiracy to invert all of our values, to turn our vices into virtues and virtues into vices, must be stopped at all costs. It is the rallying cry of my favorite punk song, Nazi Punks F*** Off by the Dead Kennedys. Because for some reason now, in 2025, thanks in part to Snyder's cultivation of some of the most insufferable incel chuds you'll ever block on X as a rabid fanbase, it is now suddenly incumbent upon all of us to mutually recognize that yes, indeed, the Nazi punks need to f*** off. And what I sincerely hope is a mostly forgotten bit of trivia by the time this video comes out, on the eve of the new film's premiere, Gunn courted a bit of what I will only call controversy for lack of a better term, because I don't want to give the people engaging in it credit for actually creating anything worthy of discussion. It stemmed from an interview he gave where, at the height of our government's new mass deportation policy, he confidently pointed out the objective fact that Superman is an illegal immigrant, and that the movie was ultimately about kindness, naturally attracting the ire of all your favorite people who hate immigrants and kindness. And you know what? They were right to be mad. Because this movie is a rejection of everything they represent and a direct repudiation of their very being, and that's what I love about it. They are literally in the movie, depicted accurately as a troupe of monkeys with brain implants typing out social media hate to weaponize cancel culture at the behest of an evil tech billionaire, mirroring the thing they actually did to Gunn to get him fired by Disney, ironically leading him into the position to make the movie they all now hate for how realistically it depicts and debunks them. Funny how life works out sometimes, huh? Last year, Donald, best friend with Epstein for decades, Trump, was re-elected president by a slim majority that, if you believe some pollsters, was helped in large part by the bros of the manosphere, or some such garbage I can't be bothered to keep straight. This is a loose confederation of our new modern intelligentsia. Joe Rogan cast-off podcast grifters, those Gamergate guys who get so mad when video games give you a trans option or a fake woman isn't hot enough to goon to, and genuine, actual, full-blown Nazis. Until their hilarious falling out, the twin kings of this movement were Trump and billionaire tech bro nativist ketamine addict Elon Musk, that Zig Highland fool who tried to make his AI Grok think more like him and instantly created Mecha Hitler, all while living inside his own little pocket universe full of cancel culture-loving hate monkeys. Yeah, Lex Luthor in this movie is just Elon Musk, or rather the man who would be Iron Man is Lex Luthor, since technically Lex came first and was being a rich dick long before baby Elon was swimming in his dad's apartheid diamond mine like Scrooge McDuck. Pretty sure that's how apartheid diamond mines work, right? Can I just say how much it pisses me off that he called his stupid racist AI Grok? If you don't know, grok is actually a term that comes from one of my favorite sci-fi novels, Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. It's a Martian word, and it literally means to drink. But on Mars, because water is so scarce, to share it with another is a sacred bond that puts you in a collective so strong that you would willingly die if only someone else in your bond asked you to. To grok is to empathize so profoundly with someone or something that you effectively become one with it, to understand it on a level that fosters a kind of clearly communist collective instinct that Elon Musk would want to build camps to house the people who have it. Musk genuinely once called empathy
the fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy.
And he calls his AI Grok. He's so mired in the Dunning-Kruger effect that built him that he's too stupid to understand that he doesn't understand it, but carries on anyway because no one ever tells him no. It's kind of how I react to Snyder's Superman. Why the hell are you playing around with stuff you don't know anything about or even care about? This is the most annoying thing for me about all of these bullshit right-wing culture war controversies. These chuds aren't just criticizing or condemning media they don't like. They're engaging in this weird kayfabe where they pretend to be a part of a fan base that they are ideologically incapable of appreciating just so they can have some false claim of authenticity to say that they are offended by its supposed transformation into something other than the thing they loved when they never loved it in the first place. I'm not gatekeeping, saying they aren't real fans because I don't like them or they aren't as big a fan as I am. I'm saying they are lying about being fans. It's stolen valor, like Musk faking his high scores in video games by hiring players to boost his accounts. You can't be against diversity and be a Star Trek fan when the motto of the Federation is literally infinite diversity and infinite combinations. You can't be against wokeness and be a Doctor Who fan when he's the wokest character in all of fiction. You can't be anti-empathy and claim to value the concept of grok, and you can't hate kindness and kind people and be a fan of Superman. Fascists are incapable of truly appreciating art beyond its power to manipulate through iconography. They understand its power, but will never truly understand its capacity to elucidate the beauty of the world, because they are ideologically opposed to and mentally closed off from that beauty.
We've been imaginative enough to invent dwarves and mermaids, but we couldn't possibly imagine black dwarves or mermaids. We can imagine magic-wielding TTRPG characters, but not ones in wheelchairs. We can imagine post-apocalyptic sci-fi super soldiers, but not ones who are trans. So we do have an imagination. We've imagined so many things, all these systems and concepts and fictions. We just can't imagine any further. And that kind of doesn't make sense, right?
I genuinely don't believe that Zack Snyder has ever actually read a comic book other than the ones he's adapted, and even then, probably just looked at the pictures. He respects the imagery of the death of Superman or Dark Knight Returns, but doesn't look beyond this to the work itself. He can recreate them superficially, but doesn't actually know what they are about and probably doesn't care. He's the kind of guy who read Watchmen and thinks Rorschach is cool. The kind of guy who made Alan Moore shudder when they'd stop him on the street. James Gunn cares about everything, and it shows. There's something that is often said about Batman, that to understand him you need to know that Batman is not the mask that Bruce Wayne wears. Bruce Wayne is the mask that Batman wears. The human Bruce Wayne died in the alley with his parents, and something else walked out, something beyond human, an avatar of justice. I've always felt Superman is the exact opposite. He started out an alien, but in discovering his human parents, he discovered his humanity. He's Clark Kent. Superman is just his job. Gunn's story is basically about him learning this, struggling with his complicated heritage and deciding which parent's example to follow, and finally choosing to embrace his humanity. Snyder's Superman is a sad, lonely god whose human connections are a burden to constantly sulk over. He's not Superman, he's the Nietzschean Übermensch, the fascist ideal of the philosopher God-King, sent to impress us with his power over us and his inherent benevolent superiority. You know, the thing Lex Luthor thinks he is and what makes him a villain? Snyder's world is one in which the bad guys win because that's dark and darkness is cool, and maybe because he's an authoritarian priming us for when the bad guys win in real life. Gunn's world is one where the good guys are good guys, the bad guys are the bad guys, and we're actually rooting for the right things for once. It feels crazy to have to spell it out, since it just feels like he's doing the bare minimum thing all movies should be doing, but we've been letting these garbage people feed us so much garbage for so long, we forgot what good movies were supposed to be until he came around to remind us. James Gunn's Superman is a love letter to one of my favorite Superman stories, All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison. It doesn't adapt the narrative, but tonally it is perfect. Grant Morrison's philosophy when taking out a long-running character like Superman is basically to accept everything about the history, the good, the bad, the silly, the serious, and treat it all as valid and canonical, often incorporating or recontextualizing obscure bits of Silver Age lore we all thought we needed to be ashamed of because we learned all the wrong lessons from Frank Miller in the 80s. He would go on to do the same thing with Batman, and a very good run on that book as well. Gunn seems to have the same approach, with references to stuff like hypno-glasses and dimensional imps, and the triumphant return of the red underwear. Snyder famously didn't use the red underwear because he couldn't figure out how they fit into the character as he was depicting him, which he needed his audience to take seriously. I hate to boil down my point to say that your Superman world doesn't have a place for red underwear, then you probably shouldn't bother making it, but that's exactly what I'm saying. If he couldn't figure out how to make it work because the Enterprise was inherently unworkable, he didn't know how to love Superman enough to appreciate it, he didn't know how to love the silliness of the red underwear, well, maybe he should never have done it in the first place. My favorite moment in All-Star Superman is literally a one-page mini-story and an issue of mini-stories representing a day in the life of Superman on the job. It's just a scene of him stopping a woman from jumping off a building, revealing that even though she thought no one cared and no one was listening, he was. Full disclosure, I haven't been doing very well mentally or emotionally for a long time. I've been struggling with depression, which has only been exacerbated by our current political situation, grappling with my own internal issues with anxiety and self-worth, only to lose all hope for the future of the country I love has, as you might imagine, thrown me for a bit of a loop of late. I'm not saying this movie turned everything around for me or anything, but it does give me a little bit of hope back, that maybe on a cultural level we might have a chance to start moving in the right direction. In the same way that the rise of the Snyderverse coincided and signaled a rise of negativity that has been co-opted by the worst people in the world trying to choke us to death with it, maybe this is signaling something else. If this is designed to be an antidote to the toxicity of the recent past, maybe it triggers something and just needs a little time to work. Maybe it gives some people some hope of their own, and maybe that hope is the first step to pull us out of this dark hole we're all in. Personally, I fear, to extend this horrible metaphor, that our body politic is dead and you can't cure a corpse, but hopefully I'm wrong. And I didn't have that hope a week ago. And that's kind of a miracle that I think only a real superhero could pull off.